Hello again, everybody. My name is Tuba. I'm a senior product designer at Squarespace. I'm based in New York, and I am originally from Turkey. And I want to start by thanking the Geekle team first for organizing this event, where we can all come together and share our experiences and learn from one another. In this presentation, I will be sharing with you some techniques and best practices on storytelling, and we'll cover that how we can use these techniques to enhance our design communication. As designers, we worked with many different stakeholders, from product managers to developers, design leaders, maybe the CEO of your company if you work at a small startup, or you might work at a design agency and need to engage with clients more than anybody else. So regardless of your position, your role as a designer, you're always expected to communicate your ideas with your stakeholders. And sometimes it's as simple as handing off a design file to your engineers, so you can come together with them, you go through your file, and before the engineers go ahead and start executing. Well, sometimes it's more serious than that. You might need to ensure that your design leadership or the leadership at your company aligns with your design direction decisions and believes that they're equally important for your business and the users. And sometimes you might need to have buy-in from a client about a landing page that you're designing, so then you can impress them and then you can keep them as your client. Now, I will switch gears here and ask you all a question. There is a lot of research done to rank people's biggest fears. And no surprises there that the clowns and spiders are always at the top 10 of that list. But can you guess that what is the most common social fear that people have? Some drum rolls. Meanwhile, you can type your guess into the comments. Well, those who guessed public speaking, you guessed it right. This is one of the biggest fears that we have socially. And the underlying reason of this fear, like many others, is judgment. It's how much we all are scared by being judged by others. It's like, as a designer, you're tasked to work in a place where you're surrounded by spiders. It's like you have to fight with this one of the biggest fears constantly, per project, per client. And if you're someone like me or many other human beings in this planet, if English is your second language, maybe you're an introvert and you have feared public speaking, suffered from this fear for so long, you know how hard this can get. And early in my career, whenever my manager would ask me to present a project in front of a crowd, in front of the company, I would feel like this.
That you had you could do so you.
Well, this was me, or at least like this was what I thought that others were perceiving me. And when you're a kid, this is funny, this is cute, but when you're an adult and you feel this way, it's not really helpful. And I realized that no matter how much I wanted to avoid the times when I have to present, I really couldn't. It was part of the job. So better I learn it. So yeah, I faced this hard, cold fact that there's no way for me to run away from these uncomfortable situations. So I decided to embrace my fear. And I asked myself this question: how can I get better at public speaking? I don't know about you, but I am a type of person, I have a peace of mind when I have a plan. So I started writing down things that I could do to target this question. I wanted to sign up for a workshop or a class to improve public speaking, sign up for any presentation opportunity that shows up, to just fight with that feeling and practice and observe good presenters around me, my coworkers, my leaders, or people, good storytellers online, and see what's the pattern there. So this is like a couple of years ago. I decided to take acting classes to overcome my fear of public speaking. I don't know what I thought this was a good idea. And For those who are not familiar, in these amateur acting classes, you study just a piece of a script every week and you perform it in front of your class. So nothing more, just your class. But to be honest, it was like a torture in the beginning, that minutes of embarrassment every week. I have to stand there and say my lines. But more I did it, more I felt less embarrassed. And I started watching other people. So I kind of like blend into the crowd. And here you see that we're trying to perform a mini script with my scene partner. And you can see like I'm horribly overacting and it's really, really bad. But the goal was not learning how to act. The goal was learning how to speak in public. And it kind of worked, but not that much. It wasn't the only thing that I had to do. Besides performing or trying to perform, we were also doing script analysis in these classes. And guess what we were using to untangle each script that we were reading? The dramatic arc. And I'm sure that some of you have seen a version of this graph before in a different context, because this is a very common tool used in storytelling for centuries. It's a type of a narrative structure used by any type of storyteller to write and structure stories around key moments. Then coincidentally, that at the same time when I was taking these classes, I was designing a product. It was an online video editing tool. And it was a great project that I was tasked to design end-to-end product experience. I was sketching, prototyping, testing with my users, all that great stuff comes with the design thinking, agile product development. But the best part of this time for me was when I was working with our video producer to define the story arcs for our templates. And I was tasked to bring those structures into our product experience. And I noticed how video could be a strong storytelling tool. And sometimes with any creative tool that we work on as designers, we're basically helping other people to tell stories better. Then I started to think how much of a landing page structure can also be based on this formula. Above the fold and right below it is the beginning of your story. This is where you hook people in, and then you unravel the details of your service, your product in the middle, and then you resolve it at the end. Or the advertising videos we watch every day on TV, on social platforms, the content that we engage on social platforms, they also tell us stories. So I started this journey with the goal of feeling more comfortable at presenting in front of people. But at the end, I started seeing stories and dramatic arc at every content that I consume. And what I noticed that being good at public speaking all boils down to one thing: good storytelling. So I tweaked my question and asked, how can one be good at storytelling? To get better at storytelling, we need to first understand the stories as a tool. I want you to remember the last time you told a story to someone. Maybe you were sitting at a bar with a friend and you told them about your week. Maybe you called your mom and told her that a recipe that you tried last night proudly. Maybe it was in the morning when you presented a concept to your manager. Well, the good news is human beings have been telling stories since the beginning of time. We all grew up listening stories. So at this point, it's kind of embedded in our genes. It influences how our brains function. And let it sink that we all have experience with storytelling more than anything else. We just need to overcome that fear. So what makes stories so special? And why do we love them? There are really interesting information around how our brains are affected by stories. And this is the first one I want to share. The stories helps us remember. When information is presented in the form of a well-crafted story, it tends to stick and be remembered more effectively. When we hear emotional stories, our brain often releases a certain hormone, and this hormone helps us to remember our experiences more accurately. And according to research, that when information is conveyed through storytelling, it is 20 times more likely to be retained than plain facts. Isn't that amazing? The stories increase empathy. They stimulate the parts of our brain that helps us intuit other people's thoughts and emotions. And there's another research study that proved that people are more likely to donate money for a cause after they hear an emotional and engaging stories. And this is one of the most interesting ones to me. The stories move us, like literally, not figuratively. When we hear certain language, certain words, it lights up specific neurological regions in our brains that incite action and movement. This is why we literally want to move when we hear an inspirational TED talk. You feel motivated, and your brain tells your body to act on it. And vulnerability in storytelling helps create human connection. When you're willing to be vulnerable and share more than just the basic facts, it can enrich and give greater significance to the stories that you tell. And you know that some people are just annoyingly great at telling stories. And you know that when you hear a good storyteller, that because you're entirely hooked when you're listening to them, the narrative is engaging, and you actually appreciate a good storyteller even more when you hear a bad one. And unfortunately, no, the turtleneck sweaters are not the key to good storytelling. But this idea of being good at storytelling or bad kind of makes sense, right? This is probably why you loved a teacher that you had at high school, because they were really good at storytelling, when you fell asleep whenever maybe your literature teacher opened their mouth because they were just not good at storytelling. So being strong at storytelling is not a coincidence. So there is a formula that we can follow to get better at it. But there is no magic pill that we want to become great storytellers overnight. It's just not possible. We need to do the hard work, practice, learn more about it. Now, I want you to think about one of the best stories you heard recently. And I was looking for an example to share with you all. And I know Everything Everywhere All at Once, the movie, won various Oscars, won for the best original screenplay, and many more that I can count. But my winner story from 2022 is
It's cold. A big golden knobs. It has to choose. I can a more beautiful thing. It's cold. I can tell you all about it. I mean, look at this thing. When I tried it, I don't anything change. I hope you have a fantastic day.
Well, to summarize, for those who were not lucky enough to see this interview from last summer with Tarek, now known as the Corn Kid, he starts talking about corn and his feelings about corn passionately during a brief interview. And then an artist writes a song with everything that he says. And the Corn Kid then became an internet phenomenon and exploded on TikTok and other social platforms. And everybody loved it. But what do you think, what made this story, the simple story about corn, told by a 7 years old, so magical and special? Well, it's the pureness of his feelings, the level of vulnerability that he shows. The words he chooses to describe his feelings are simple. The melody makes it even catchier. It sticks in our brain. It helps us to empathize. Like, I understand how this kid feels, and I respect it. And it wants me to eat corn, worship corn. So I don't know if Oscars would agree, but this is my winner story from 2022. So at this moment, I hope that you're all convinced on these two things, that good stories can trigger emotions and drive impact, and telling engaging stories should be considered as a superpower. And in this next part, we will unpack the components of storytelling. When I think of the parts of storytelling, I think of three things: the definition, structure, and delivery. We can think the definition like the foundation of a building, Without it, the whole thing would fall apart. The structure is the structure, and delivery can be imagined as the facade of the building. And the structure and facade rely on the foundation to remain intact. To create a strong story definition, you need to answer a few critical questions. What is your story about? What is the action you want to drive? Meaning that what's your end goal? And once you have an answer for this, your next question is, who is your audience? This is very important. Similar to human-centered design principles, your target audience is like your hero. Priority is not what you feel or think, is more like what your audience feel or think. And the follow-up question is, what does your audience care about the most? And I believe this video series from Wired, where the experts explain complex concepts to people at different levels, I think it's a really good example about tailoring stories depending on your audience needs. In this specific one, they explain quantum computing to a child, a teen, a college student, grad student, an expert. So the concept is the same, quantum mechanics, but they choose different words and different structures to talk about it based on the audience needs. And finally, what is the one thing that you want to stick with your audience? So what do you want them to remember when they leave the room? So following these questions and answering them can help you shape your narrative. Once you have a clear definition, the foundation, now you want to build the structure based on the needs and the goals. You need to find a way to simplify your content, make it easier to comprehend, because our minds strive for simplicity, and structure help us to resolve complexity. There are different narrative structures you can utilize while preparing for a presentation, depending on your needs. The first one is the simplest one, 3-act structure. It's great for presentations that needs to be to the point and rapid. Maybe you have 3 minutes to capture everything. In the intro, you establish your topic and why it's important. Then you go into the main content, you provide more information and share arguments to support your thesis. And in the conclusion, you summarize your main point and leave the audience with a memorable takeaway. Up next is hero's journey, where you kind of metaphorically treat your audience like your hero and take them with you when you talk about the problem, the obstacles, and finally you show them a new knowledge, a new solution. Inverted pyramid, this one can be effective in certain cases where you want to place emphasis on an insight or opportunity. So you start with a shocking statistic or a provocative question, then gradually move into more context, give more context to support your argument. The circular structure is using repetition to make your main point stick with your audience. For example, you might start and end with the same statement, or you can use a recurring metaphor throughout your presentation and revisit that over time. And this last one is nonlinear structure. This one is riskier, it's harder to be good at. And you can use this one for longer talks to keep your audience engaged. And it is almost like stitching different type of structures together. Now, we have the story definition, our foundation. We have our structure, and our last component is the delivery piece, the facade of our building. What mediums are the best to deliver your story? Are you going to verbally convey it? Will you prepare a slide deck, a prototype? Will you record a video? Or are there any other mediums that might help you to tell this specific story? Maybe it's an interactive installation, it's an XR experience. So you need to pick the best medium possible for your case, or mediums. And this last piece of delivery component is the body language and voice, the way how we show ourselves in front of audience. And I will accept that this is the hardest one for me to learn. It's connected with this idea of how safe and confident that we feel in our bodies, and how do we convey that feeling of confidence or hide the feeling of fear if you fear. So this is a hard one. Now, in this final section, I want to provide you examples based on real life scenarios. And I will use these scenarios to showcase how we as designers can utilize different components of storytelling the definition, structure, and delivery to better tell our stories. First scenario is a very common one, which I believe each of you can relate to. Assume that you want to showcase a design project in your portfolio. Let's remember the first question. What is your story about? In this case, I want to tell a story about one of my design projects. Very straightforward, right? What is my end goal? So that I can showcase that I'm qualified for a UX UI design position. And maybe it is even more specific than that. Maybe I want to become a designer at a design agency. And more specific is always better. Who is my audience then? They are recruiters or hiring managers at design agencies. And my audience want to see something specific. Now, I can drive some assumptions based on the specific audiences I just defined, right? I would say that design agencies might want to see the top-notch interaction design solutions that addresses the business needs. So maybe this is something that I really want to emphasize in my narrative. They might expect my narrative to communicate my thought process and my reasoning. And finally, they might want to see that I was not designing in silos, but was working with team members. You really need to prioritize which of these are most important. And what do I want my audience to remember? I want them to know that I go above and beyond with my interaction design skills. So I want my story to follow hero's journey structure. I don't want to take any risks for this case study. Let's say I don't want any surprises, and non-linear approach would be just too much for this project. And finally, I will tell my story through an online website. Maybe there's a website that I host to showcase my portfolio. I will maybe embed an interactive prototype, even record myself talking through the prototype, and I will use text to narrate my process on this web page, but I will keep that at minimum. So once I have all these details written down, I can go ahead and start working on my presentation or case study. The second example, the second scenario focuses on presenting to your stakeholders. So imagine the most recent design direction you had to align on with your stakeholders, with your clients. And for this one, I wanted to go over something that I experience at my work. My team and I at Squarespace, we work on improving help and support experience for our customers. And we have to work with multiple teams within customer operations so that we can execute our projects. And recently, we wanted to improve our support flow and the way how our customers access one-to-one support. So we explored some options, gathered requirements, made prototypes, and we formed an opinion on what would be the ideal support flow for Squarespace customers and for our business. So in this case, I wanted to tell a story about the new design solution that my team thinks is the best available option for our support flow, so that I can have buy-in from our stakeholders early on and influence next steps and decisions. In this case, my audience are senior leaders and team leads from customer operations department. And what do they want? They want to run the customer operations without no or minimum distraction. They want to ensure that the new design solutions or any solution are technically feasible, which is something also important for my team. And they want to foresee changes in their workflows 1 to 2 quarters earlier so they can be prepared. They can train their teams and account for the cost changes. And I want this idea to stick with my audience. The proposed support flow, these designs, is the best option available considering our needs. And in the long term, it increases operational efficiency and effectiveness. I want to use a simple yet effective structure for this story, starting with the estimated impact the solution would have, ending with the same concept. And I would gather everybody in a meeting, share my screen, show a slide deck, maybe a prototype. I would narrate my content and maybe even allow questions. So make the presentation interactive and enable questions from audience so we can clarify details early on and address any concerns as much as possible. Again, I have all these written down. I can go ahead and start working on my presentation. I'm basically halfway done at this point. Well, let's take a step back and challenge this template that I just shared with you. Yes, thinking about your audience, following a template like this can be helpful when it comes to utilizing storytelling methods in your day-to-day job. But do we really have to follow a template to tell a story? Like, what's the fun in this? Please remember that these are just some methods, right? And they might be helpful or may not, depending on your case. Storytelling is a universal communication tool that helps us in many different ways. And there are also stories told by purely driven from somewhere authentic and timeless, like the story we heard from the corn kid. He was not thinking about a target audience. And not all good stories are told based on the needs of a target audience. Stories can be powerful artistic outlets without an agenda. And at the end, they have been helping us to make sense of the world around us for centuries. Okay, at this point, I provided you some tools, right? We covered power of storytelling. We looked at the components of storytelling. We worked on a template to utilize these components for better design communication. However, one question that I asked in the beginning still stands solid. It's not the easiest one to answer, and which is strongly related to delivery component of storytelling. How do we overcome the fear of judgment? And my tips are simple here. Learn as much as possible about stories and storytelling. Learn the rules. This at least helps me personally, and I'm sure that it would help you too, because information is power, and knowing about something can help us to build the confidence that we need. It's okay to be vulnerable. When we are vulnerable, we are our most authentic selves. And believe me that ideas, emotions are conveyed strongly when you start being vulnerable and open up. And finally, maybe there is a magic pill for being a better storyteller. Always remember to be more like the corn kid. Thank you so much for listening. I will be sharing this slideshow on my LinkedIn today. The template will be shared on Figma community too, so anyone can access, and feel free to follow me. And now I will hand it back to our moderator for the next presenter.
So thank you for the great speech, and I really like your approach with storytelling. I hope you'll join us again for the Q&A. Thank you.